In 2003, a team of German archaeologists scanned a remote stretch of the southern Iraqi desert with ground-penetrating radar. These devices sent signals deep into the earth, mapping anything buried beneath the surface. And what they found defied every expectation. An entire city hidden under the sand. Organized streets, a sophisticated canal system, sprawling gardens. Scientists called it the Venice of the desert. And right at its center, beneath the ancient bed of the Euphrates, they found something no one was prepared for. A structure resembling a royal tomb, in the exact location where the legends say a king named Gilgamesh was buried. A king the ancient texts describe as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. A king who built the greatest walls Mesopotamia had ever seen. A king who traveled to the edge of the world in search of eternal life. But before we find out what happened with that discovery and why the excavation was suddenly abandoned, we need to go back more than 4,000 years to the oldest story ever written by human hands. A story of a friendship that changed a king. A beast guarding a sacred forest. A goddess who destroyed the man who rejected her. And a journey to the end of the world in search of the secret to eternal life. This is not a bedtime story. This is the Epic of Gilgamesh. In 1849, a British expedition led by an adventurer named Austen Henry Layard was digging in northern Iraq among the ruins of Nineveh, the ancient capital of the Assyrian Empire. There, they uncovered something more valuable than gold. Thousands of clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform script. The oldest library ever found. The library of King Ashurbanipal. The tablets were shipped to London, and for years, scholars painstakingly tried to decode them. Imagine sitting before a broken slab of clay covered in symbols shaped like nails, trying to decipher a language that had been dead for millennia. It was slow, exhausting work. But with every new line they translated, the surprises grew larger. The real shock came in 1872. A young scholar named George Smith was working at the British Museum, translating what seemed like an ordinary clay tablet. When he understood what was written on it, something extraordinary happened. He leaped from his chair. He started pacing the hall in a frenzy of excitement. The scholars around him had no idea what was happening. What he had found was not a trade record or a list of royal decrees. It was the story of a great flood that destroyed humanity, inscribed on clay at least 1,000 years before the Torah was written. The first evidence that the flood narrative was not exclusive to the Abrahamic traditions. But that is a thread we will come back to. That story was part of a larger epic, 12 clay tablets telling the life of a real king who ruled the city of Uruk and whose name endured for 4,000 years. But this king did not begin as a hero. He began as a monster. The city of Uruk, known as Erech in the Bible, was one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. Double walls standing 9 meters high, massive gates, a grand central temple dedicated to the goddess Ishtar, an advanced canal system that made the desert bloom. This city was a true civilization, and the tablets describe its king, Gilgamesh, in terms that paint a portrait of something more than human. 2/3 god and 1/3 mortal. Nearly 3 meters tall, stronger than any living creature. But that strength served no one but himself. He was a tyrant. He seized people's property. He trampled their rights. He imposed brutal decrees that no one dared challenge. The people of Uruk lived in constant terror. From the outside, Uruk looked magnificent. gleaming walls, gilded temples, towering gates. But inside those walls, the houses were filled with whispered grievances. People gathered in temples, weeping, praying for someone to deliver them from their king's cruelty. But their answer was not an army or a catastrophe. Their answer was to create a being equal to Gilgamesh in every way, someone who could stand up to him. Enkidu was born in the wilderness. He lived among animals, running with gazelles, drinking from streams, hunting with his bare hands. Anyone who spotted him from a distance would say this was no man, something between human and beast. Even experienced hunters were afraid to venture near his territory. But for the plan to work, Enkidu had to be drawn into the world of men. A temple priestess named Shamhat, as beautiful as she was clever, went out to find him. She spent days and nights with him, teaching him to speak, to think, to wear clothing, to eat bread instead of raw meat. And with each passing day, the animals that had been his companions since birth grew afraid of him and fled, as if they sensed he was no longer one of them. When Shamhat told him of the tyranny of Gilgamesh, something ignited inside Enkidu that he had never felt before. A fury. He decided to march to Uruk and confront the king himself. Their battle became the stuff of legend. Two giants clashing with superhuman force. Walls cracked, door frames collapsed. But the fight did not end in death. They stopped. They looked at each other, and in each other's eyes they found something unexpected. Respect, as though each had seen his own reflection in the other. From that moment, the two enemies became the closest of friends, and so began an adventure that would change both their fates forever. To prove their strength to the world, they decided to attempt what no one had dared before: enter the sacred cedar forest and face its guardian. The journey took days across open desert, hunger, thirst, and nightmares, until the forest appeared before them. And by the way, new tablets discovered at the Suleymaniya Museum in Iraq in 2011 revealed that this forest was not the silent, solemn place scholars had imagined. It was a dense, thriving ecosystem, alive with monkeys swinging through branches, strange birds calling, and creatures no human had ever encountered. The guardian's name was Humbaba. The tablets describe him in terms that chill the blood. His roar shook mountains. His breath was fire and poison. His face was a twisted map of intestines. A single glance from him could paralyze a man with terror. The battle was savage. Humbaba attacked with his fiery breath. Trees burst into flame. The air turned toxic. Gilgamesh struck him with an axe, but the blow barely scratched the creature's hide. Humbaba spun with terrifying speed and hurled him into a tree. That moment could have ended everything. But Enkidu grabbed the creature's leg from behind and dragged him off balance. In the split second Humbaba stumbled, Gilgamesh recovered and drove his weapon into the beast's neck. Enkidu finished the job, severing the head. There is an important lesson the tablets offer here. The greatest victories are never won alone. They raised the severed head as proof of their triumph, but they did not yet understand what they had unleashed. Humbaba was not just a monster. He was a guardian appointed by the gods. Killing him was a violation of divine order itself. The victory over Humbaba made Gilgamesh the most celebrated man alive. All of Uruk was in celebration, flowers raining from the walls. But the festivities caught the attention of someone dangerous: Ishtar, the goddess of love and war. She appeared before him and offered him marriage. "Become my husband," she said. "I will give you wealth beyond measure, power beyond imagining." Any other king would have fallen to his knees in gratitude. But Gilgamesh refused, and he did not refuse quietly. He humiliated her in front of everyone. He listed every man she had ever loved and destroyed, one after another. Those words were a dagger to her pride. And Ishtar is not the kind to forgive. She stormed up to the heavens and demanded the gods release the bull of heaven upon the earth. This was no ordinary beast, a celestial creature of unimaginable size. A ball of fire burned between its horns. Every step cracked the ground open. Its breath spread drought and death. Uruk descended into true horror. Buildings collapsed on their occupants. People fled in every direction. Children screamed. The bull crushed everything in its path. But once again, the two heroes faced the catastrophe together. Enkidu seized the bull by its horns and held on with everything he had, even as the creature dragged him across the ground. And Gilgamesh drove his spear into the beast's chest. The bull of heaven fell. The people celebrated, but their joy would be shorter than they could imagine. Killing a celestial creature was a direct offense against the gods. A sentence was passed. Someone had to pay the price, and it was Enkidu who was chosen. The illness struck Enkidu without warning. The warrior who had wrestled monsters was suddenly bedridden, unable to move. His iron muscles withered. The light in his eyes, the same fire that blazed in every battle, went dark. In his final days, Enkidu was haunted by visions of the afterlife, a dark underground realm blanketed in gray dust, lost souls shuffling in the shadows, eating clay. No sky, no light, no hope. Everyone who had ever died, kings and peasants alike, shared the same fate in that place. And Enkidu was full of regret. He told Gilgamesh he was sorry for challenging the gods, sorry even more for dragging his friend into all of it. And Gilgamesh sat beside him, holding his hand, tears falling silently, powerless. Imagine a king who was part god, a man with the strength to level mountains, a man who slew Humbaba and the bull of heaven, standing helpless, watching his closest friend die before his eyes, with no force in the world that could stop what was happening. Enkidu died. The entire city mourned. Gilgamesh ordered a massive golden statue built in his memory, but the statue could not put out the fire burning inside him. He withdrew from everyone, tormented by a single thought. If Enkidu died, then I will die too. There is no difference between us. For the first time in his life, he felt true fear. Not fear of an enemy he could fight, fear of a fate from which there is no escape. Grief turned to obsession, and Gilgamesh spoke a single sentence that changed the course of the entire story. I will not allow myself to die the way Enkidu died. I must find immortality. He left Uruk, left his kingdom and his glory behind, and set out on a journey harder than any war he had ever fought. His destination, a man named Utnapishtim, the only human being who had survived the Great Flood. The one mortal the gods had granted eternal life. The journey took him to places beyond human imagination. First, the land of shadows, a place where night outlasted day. The earth was silent, the sky was gray, as though life itself had abandoned this corner of the world. Then he reached the kingdom of the scorpions. There, he encountered guardians unlike anything he had ever seen. Their lower bodies were those of giant scorpions, their upper halves human. Stinger tails arched overhead, venom dripping, eyes glowing in the darkness. When these guardians looked at Gilgamesh, standing before them with no weapons and no army, they saw only one thing in his eyes: resolve. And they let him pass. He entered a tunnel through the mountain. Total darkness. Not a single particle of light. He walked for 12 straight days without seeing his own hand in front of his face. Wind howling, echoes spiraling around him. Until on the final day, a tiny point of light appeared in the distance. When he emerged on the other side, he found the sea of death stretched before him. An ocean unlike any he had ever seen. Black water, perfectly still, reflecting nothing. No waves, no sound. A single touch of its surface could kill. On the shore, he found a weathered old boatman named Uruk, the only person who knew how to cross. Uruk agreed to ferry him across on one condition: strip off every last piece of royal clothing. Leave behind every symbol of power and glory. Gilgamesh, once the greatest king on earth, removed everything. He stood naked before the sea of death, as though the message was clear. Anyone who seeks the truth must first shed every mask. When Gilgamesh finally arrived, he expected to find something extraordinary. A god, perhaps. Something clearly more than human. Instead, he found a simple old man living with his wife in a mud brick hut beside a river. Utnapishtim told him his story, and this is the part that made George Smith run through the British Museum in 1872. Because this story bears a striking resemblance to the story of Noah. Long ago, Utnapishtim said, the gods decided to drown the earth because humanity had grown corrupt. But the God of wisdom warned me in a dream. He told me to build a vessel. I gathered my family and 2 of every animal. The flood came, 6 days and 7 nights. The rain never stopped. It destroyed everything. When the waters receded, the vessel came to rest on a mountaintop. I released a dove to search for dry land. It returned. I released a raven. It never came back. And from that day on, the gods granted my wife and me eternal life. Remember when we said George Smith ran through the museum? Now you understand why. The same story. A vessel, a great flood. Animals gathered in pairs. Birds sent out as scouts. A mountain where the ship comes to rest. But this version was written on clay more than 1,000 years before the Torah. And what makes it even more extraordinary is that nearly every ancient civilization on Earth, from Mesopotamia to India to China to the Aztecs in Mexico to the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, every one of them has their own version of the Great Flood. Is this simply a shared human fantasy? Or are all these civilizations remembering the same catastrophe that actually happened? Gilgamesh begged, "Teach me the secret. I want to live as you do." Utnapishtim said, "Immortality is not meant for mortals, but if you can stay awake for 7 days and 7 nights without sleeping, then perhaps you will deserve it." Gilgamesh said it would be easy. Within minutes, he was fast asleep. The man who had defeated Humbaba and the Bull of Heaven was defeated by sleep. And Utnapishtim placed a loaf of bread beside him each day, so that when he woke and counted the loaves, he would know for himself that he had failed. Gilgamesh woke up. He looked around. He saw the loaves. He counted them. 7, from fresh to rotten. The truth hit him like a wall. He wept. But Utnapishtim's wife took pity on him. She told her husband, "This man crossed the entire world to reach you. Do not let him return empty-handed." And so Utnapishtim revealed one final secret. At the bottom of the sea, there is a plant. It will not grant you true immortality, but it will restore your youth. You could live your entire life again from the beginning. Hope surged through Gilgamesh once more. He tied heavy stones to his ankles to sink faster and plunged into the water. He dove through blue, then green, then darkness. The light faded. The pressure crushed his chest. His lungs screamed for air, but he kept going, deeper and deeper, until he saw something glowing faintly on the seabed. He reached out. His fingers closed around the stem. He pulled it free. He burst through the surface, clutching the plant above his head, gasping, and for the first time since the journey began, he smiled. On the road home, he stopped beneath a tree to rest. Exhaustion overwhelmed him, and he fell asleep. And that is when everything changed. From between the roots of the tree, a serpent emerged. It caught the scent of the plant, crept forward in silence, and swallowed it whole. In that instant, the snake shed its old skin and emerged renewed, reborn. Gilgamesh woke to find the plant gone and the discarded skin lying beside him. Why a serpent? In nearly every ancient civilization, the snake is a symbol of renewal because it is the one creature that can shed its skin and start fresh. It is as though the epic is telling us, nature holds the secret to immortality, but it was never meant for human hands. Gilgamesh wept bitterly, all the suffering, the entire journey, and in the end, a snake claimed the prize. But in that moment of weeping, something happened that was deeper than any victory he had ever won. Gilgamesh understood. Gilgamesh returned to his city. He stood before the walls of Uruk, the walls he had built with his own hands, and he saw them with new eyes. The walls, the temples, the canals, the city he created, the people who lived within it. And in that moment, he stopped seeing defeat. He began to see the truth. Physical immortality is not for mortals. That is a fact that must be accepted. But there is another kind of immortality. Legacy. The work you leave behind. The story that is told long after you are gone. From that day forward, he was transformed. From a tyrant into a just ruler. He spent the rest of his life serving his people and building his city. Not out of fear of punishment, but because he finally understood this was the only immortality he would ever have. And he ordered his story to be inscribed on clay tablets and buried within the city walls, so that future generations would find them. And they did. 4,000 years later. Today, artificial intelligence is helping researchers reassemble fragments of broken tablets and revealing lines that no one has read before. In one of the newly discovered passages, Utnapishtim asks Gilgamesh, "Was a palace ever built for a fool?" As if the epic is still speaking, still has something to say. And the tomb of Gilgamesh that was found in 2003? The excavation was halted by the war. To this day, no one has been able to finish what was started. The tomb is still waiting. Just as the epic itself waited thousands of years for someone to find it. The Epic of Gilgamesh is not just an ancient story. It is the first time in history that a human being stood before death and asked, "Is there hope?" And the answer that arrived 4,000 years later is still the same answer. Build something worthy of outliving you.